In the putrid heart of dystopian Tokyo, where acid rain corroded buildings and toxic smog choked the lungs of its inhabitants, the Crimson Lotus Geisha House stood as a beacon of false hope. Its once vibrant red paint now peeled like scabs, revealing the rotting wood beneath. Inside, Hana, the last true geisha, sat before a cracked mirror, her trembling fingers smearing white makeup over her gaunt face. As she traced the outline of her lips with blood-red pigment, Hana's mind wandered to her childhood. The memory of her father's calloused hands as he shoved her into Madame Yuki's arms flashed before her eyes. "She'll fetch a good price," he had muttered, the stench of cheap sake on his breath. 7-year-old Hana had screamed, clawing at the air as Madame Yuki dragged her into the house, her nails leaving crimson streaks on the doorframe. The sound of shuffling feet in the hallway snapped Hana back to the present. Her sisters were awakening, their decaying bodies creaking like old floorboards. She shuddered, recalling the night she discovered their true nature. It had been during a late-night practice session. The scent of incense and decay had led Hana to a hidden chamber where she found Madame Yuki hunched over a lifeless geisha. The old woman's gnarled hands were elbow-deep in the corpse's chest cavity, manipulating a pulsating, otherworldly organ. When Madame Yuki turned, her milky eyes blazing with unholy fire, Hana had bitten her tongue to stifle a scream. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth as Madame Yuki hissed, "You're next, my dear. When your usefulness ends, you'll join our little family forever." Now, as Hana descended the creaking stairs to the main hall, she felt the weight of the vengeful spirit pressing down on her. It whispered promises of power, its voice like nails scraping against her skull. The shamasen's discordant notes echoed through the house, signaling the start of the evening's entertainment. In the main hall, corrupt politicians and yakuza bosses lounged on silk cushions stained with sake and other, less savory fluids. Their eyes, glazed with lust and intoxication, followed Hana's every move as she knelt before them. The tatami mats beneath her knees squelched, damp with the residue of countless nights of debauchery. As Hana began her dance, tendrils of ethereal energy snaked from her body, wrapping around the mesmerized audience. She watched in horror as their faces contorted, skin sagging and eyes sinking into their skulls. One man's cheek split open, maggots spilling from the wound as he smiled, oblivious to his decay. "More," the spirit demanded, its voice reverberating through Hana's bones. "Give me their essence." Tears threatened to spill from Hana's eyes as she continued her performance, each graceful movement bringing her audience closer to death. The air grew thick with the stench of rotting flesh and the metallic tang of fresh blood. As the dance reached its crescendo, Hana felt a surge of rebellion course through her veins. With a final defiant twirl, she broke from the choreography, her movements becoming wild and frenzied. The spirit howled in rage, its tendrils lashing out at the confused audience. Men screamed as their flesh liquefied, muscles sloughing off bones that crumbled to dust. In the ensuing chaos, Hana fled, her feet carrying her to Madame Yuki's private chambers. The old woman stood waiting, a pulsating, otherworldly heart clutched in her gnarled fingers. "I always knew you were special, Hana," she crooned, her voice like grinding bones. Hana's eyes darted around the room, taking in the grotesque collection of organs that lined the walls. Each one glowed with an eerie light, pulsing in an unnatural rhythm. "What are you?" she gasped, bile rising in her throat. Madame Yuki's face split into a horrific grin, her teeth yellowed and sharp. "I am the keeper of secrets, the mistress of life and death," she cackled. "For centuries, I have fed the spirit, trading the souls of the innocent for power and immortality." As she spoke, the room began to shift and warp. The floor beneath Hana's feet turned to writhing maggots, their tiny bodies squirming between her toes. The walls oozed a thick, black substance that smelled of putrefaction and despair. "Join us, Hana," Madame Yuki hissed, her form elongating and twisting. Her skin split open, revealing a mass of writhing tentacles and glistening organs. Embrace the darkness and live forever. Hana's heart pounded in her chest, threatening to burst through her ribcage. In that moment of desperation, she heard the spirit's voice once more. "I can grant you freedom," it whispered seductively. But the price is high. Time seemed to slow as Hana weighed her options. Death, undeath, or a bargain with an entity she didn't understand. With a heavy heart, she made her choice. "I accept," Hana said, her voice barely a whisper. The spirit's laughter echoed through the chamber as it materialized, a swirling vortex of darkness and stolen souls. Madame Yuki shrieked in fury, lunging at Hana with clawed hands dripping with ichor. But it was too late. The entity enveloped Hana, its cold embrace seeping into her very being. She felt her life force draining away, replaced by something ancient and terrible. Her skin hardened and cracked, her eyes turning to swirling pools of darkness. As her consciousness faded, Hana caught one last glimpse of the world she was leaving behind. The Crimson Lotus Geisha House imploded, its foundations shaken by the spirit's power. The undead geishas collapsed, their bodies disintegrating into piles of putrid flesh and bone. Madame Yuki's screams were cut short as she was dragged into the vortex, her centuries of evil finally catching up to her. In the days that followed, whispers spread through Tokyo of a haunting melody that could be heard on quiet nights. Those who listened too closely found themselves drawn to abandoned buildings and dark alleys, their bodies later discovered drained of all life, expressions of ecstasy frozen on their faces. Hana's family searched for her, their hearts heavy with guilt and grief. They would never know the truth of what happened to their daughter, the last true geisha of the Crimson Lotus. Her mother woke screaming each night, swearing she could see Hana's face in the shadows, beckoning her to join her in the darkness. And in the twisted underbelly of the city, a new legend was born. Whispers of a beautiful spirit that danced in the moonlight, offering salvation to the desperate and damned. But those who accepted her hand soon learned that freedom always comes at a price. Hana, once a prisoner of flesh and bone, now existed as something beyond human comprehension. Her ethereal form glided through the streets, leaving a trail of withered corpses in her wake. Her dance, once a thing of beauty, had become a macabre spectacle that lured the unsuspecting to their doom. As the years passed, the memory of the Crimson Lotus faded from public consciousness. But for those who knew where to look, traces of its legacy remained. In forgotten corners of Tokyo, one might stumble upon faded photographs of beautiful geishas with empty eyes, or hear the faint strains of a shamisen playing an impossibly sorrowful tune. And if you're very unlucky, you might catch a glimpse of a figure in a blood-red kimono, her face a mask of perfect beauty hiding the horror beneath. Her song will call to you, promising release from your earthly burdens. But beware, for to accept her invitation is to forfeit your soul to the insatiable hunger of the last geisha, doomed to dance for eternity in the shadows of a city that has long since forgotten her name.